fortunately, people have been good about it, and I think both like on the CS:GO and the Valorant side, it's always like, give me the inside scoop. Like, what are they working on? And I think they're both taking inspiration from each other at this point. So I've been in a good position where they both treated me very, very well. And, I'm sure there's a future where like ESL probably wants to do Valorant events. Maybe they do. And I know Blast has. So there's a lot of crossover.
What is, since you opened the door to that, obviously, since your main specialty has been observing all these years, and I will say, by the way, that is by definition, I know a lot of people think they have this title in esports, observer is by definition the most thankless job, because think about it, you only remember they exist when they fuck up. If they do their job well, you actually don't even think a person was involved, you just go, I'm seeing the game, brilliant.
I know,
it's so fucked up, isn't it? So the joke is, like, the only time they reference it is when you miss the kill, or you click the wrong button or whatever. And also, I'll throw this in there as well. The thing that I think in the modern day must tilt observers is people also forget the observer doesn't pick which camera we're showing. That's the producer. Like, the observer just shows the camera angle. Like, the producer's the one who chose the wrong camera. Like, they don't really flip through all of them. They have the couple. So anyway, I'm getting triggered myself there. Well, that is one area that in CSGO, we've never really, if people don't know, Valve's never put any special attention to that. The TOs have a fairly limited setup, and you figure out what you do yourself. As you say, in Valorant, they actually intentionally made this game an esport. Like, what did they do with some of the observing side of things?
Yeah, I mean, in Counter-Strike, first off, I think I got like one thing in the game that I asked for over many emails. But Valorant has been, they've done a wonderful job in that Prius, myself, and eventually Yeti, we're in their Slack, we're in their conversations, we're in their daily gameplay tests, asking us questions, letting us watch the staff play the games and give input from a spectator perspective. So it's been built from the ground up with observing esports in their minds, and they're using the experts to develop that. So we've taken a lot of inspiration, obviously, from what CS:GO does very well, and we've even added things that don't even exist in CS:GO. So like following. So for example, like we can, if we're doing a remote show, the producer can open Valorant. We can open Valorant from thousands of miles away and do all of our movements in the game. And then the producer can set it to follow Sapphire's movements. Now that exists in Counter-Strike in a sense, but you've got to use GoTV, you've got to use different launch commands, you have to add certain IPs into the game server. It's a big convoluted process. So in Valorant, just have two spectators and set to follow one. I did an event with Tarek and Ludwig the other couple weekends ago. Same thing. They all hopped in the observer slots. They wanted to talk about the games, but they didn't actually observe themselves. They just said, follow Sapphire's movements, and it follows all my movements. So we were able to create new things that don't really exist in a lot of games, because this is like, they built this to be an esport.
One thing I really like about Valorant, or at least from the perspective of someone who's not an observer, so by all means, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that I feel like of the esports that I've worked in, especially the main three that I've worked in, the observers in Valorant get a lot of reverence. There's a lot of credit. There's a lot of, like, people know who the observers are. And I don't know what, like, because in other games, I feel that observers have been very underpaid. I don't know what that's like in Valorant, but like, at least from a social standpoint, it feels like there's a lot of kind of veneration given to observers, which I think is like a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. I think, and I'm happy to say it because I'm proud of how Riot has treated us. Our payment is very, very good in Valorant. Very, very good. We're treated very well. And I'm grateful for that. So first off, Riot themselves have done a good job. There's been, I don't know, like, it's just on social, like all these like third-party events have done a good job about, like, they'll have their talent announcement, and right below it they'll have their producer, their observer, their replay announcers. I don't really know where that spawned from. Maybe it's just the fact that a lot of these third parties are run by the community themselves, and they want to promote themselves. I don't know.
I know
but
that was something that like we
yeah.
really pushed for in Rainbow Six, was to ensure the observers were included in like talent announcements. And I think like in Siege there was a bit of a problem like for a while about like observers sort of were kind of like hidden away, and I don't just mean like in terms of talent announcements, I just mean like sometimes it almost felt uncomfortable as a talent to know that I was kind of being treated a little bit differently to how the observers were. Yeah, so I like, at least from where I'm sitting, and I'm not the, you know, the be all end all of the view on the industry, but from where I'm sitting, like over the course of the last few years, it feels like it has been almost like a social change that people have kind of wanted that credit to be more publicly known.
Yeah, I think so. You know, and kind of part of it goes back to the talent themselves. I know, like in some of the ESL days, like some of the casters would want to know that Prius and I are working.
They would always shout you out, right? Yeah, they would give you a little comment.
They can do their jobs better if they have good observers. So I think part of that goes back to the talent. I think there's like you said, a social movement. I think there's more awareness that there's other jobs in the industry. If you can't be a player, if you can't be a caster, there's other jobs available. So I think there's more awareness around that.
I think people also, like, just to jump in with that, like, I think there's like, people don't realize how freaking knowledgeable you have to be an observer. Like, I always say to people, like, I've always been a color caster and an analyst. So in theory, I do the job where you have to know a lot. But I feel like both as a caster and an analyst, you have time to think about what it is you're going to say. Whereas an observer, you have to react so intuitively to your game sense and your game knowledge of what's happening and what is going to happen. And it's like, sure, like there's an element of that as a talent, but I don't think it's to the same extent, because like I said, you get some time to like think about it when you're on air, and you don't as an observer. So like people who don't have a good game sense, just like that job just isn't for you. It's such a highly skilled job, not just because you have to be able to use a controller well.
Yeah, there's like, you know, there's you can do a good job by knowing how to read the radar, but you can do a great job by understanding the players, understanding all the possible scenarios that could happen. There's obviously some big differences between Counter-Strike and Valorant observing, and in Counter-Strike, I'm pretty much relying on that radar. In Valorant, there's so many things that can happen that people get pinged through walls, and people are going to die through the walls. Very thick walls compared to Counter-Strike, which is now, you know, they don't have the wall spans like they used to, but there's a lot you have to know. So like I'm studying tape just like I would when I was a player. So I'm watching games all the time. I'm looking for tendencies. I'm looking for different strats. I've got piles and piles of notes, just like I would when I was competing. So there's a lot of thought that goes into it so that we can just react much faster. We can see a certain setup and know exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah, I've got a few points on that. Like, one thing I would say on the observer angle that you're talking about here is, I think that's actually why, if people don't know, it's actually not a surprise to me when I look back in hindsight that, like, Yanko was, if you don't know, before Sapphire and Priest, the most famous observer, and he became basically the most famous analyst in the world in CSGO. He still works on the desk to this day. And then similarly, if people don't know, at the end of 1.6, in terms at CSGO rather, that's how old school my brain is, when we transitioned to Valorant, Sliggy was becoming famous as the main observer guy, and he obviously became a top coach in Valorant. The reason it doesn't surprise me is because basically what you're talking about, an analyst himself, is if you don't know, these guys, they're not really just like going to the right person. They have to essentially predict what is about to happen in the games. You actually do have to know the game really well. It's like, you'll notice this when people even are just casters. Some casters really do just focus on the crosshair. Some casters are so amazing at catching, like the second someone's doing a flank, or it's going to be like a fake, and like some of them are just so. So I think if you're going to be observer, that is essential. And then I'd also tie it into the pay angle, which is, that's probably the most brutal thing about that job in particular, is it, like I say, because when you do your job well, people don't notice you did anything. It's actually bizarrely in esports a job that involves high competence but wasn't very well compensated by the actual job, because what's bizarre is people did treat it like you could just hire all the talent and at the end be like, right, who's available? Like, and some events, notoriously, by the way, the worst events ever in CSGO history, including majors, were the ones where that's what they did. They hired all the best talent, and at the end they were like, we got our own guys we can just put, like, if people don't know, the Starlight of Berlin of mids, probably the most infamous one ever. That was the one where the joke was like they just missed every highlight. It's like they would be on the other side of the map when the highlight was happening, or they'd be on like the guy getting killed. Like it was a nightmare because the problem is, Gio, they just used some guys that they actually had from PUBG. It wasn't even CSGO people.
If you could be the best caster in the world, and you're not going to be able to cast very well if the observing is shite, because you're not going to see anything,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Like,
Yes.
so like the talent, as good as they may be, are reliant upon the like it's a building block, right?
There are
Okay,
even
cool,
more
you
now,
can-
by the way, because here's the thing. Back in the day as well, when you would just have two casters and there wasn't really much of a producer, so say it was like Anders and Semler back in the day, the difference is, back when the observing was really dodgy and we didn't have any famous people, they really might just have like, they might not even be on what their camera's on the stream. They might have like a second monitor and they might just be watching the action, so they can always get it off. But in the modern day, I mean, I'm sure you know this as a cast, most of the time you intentionally cast from the program monitor that you know is what they're seeing on screen, because you don't want to give too much info that like the guy can't see. So yeah, I agree. I think it's a mega important role. But I want to ask you, look, you don't have to give specific numbers here, but I've heard until a few years ago the people who were doing observing weren't on like real talent rates, because to be fair, talent rates themselves did like scale really crazy from like 2015 to now, as in they went Geo from like, you know, maybe you get like, I'll give you a random number, maybe you get like €600 for the whole event, like 3 days, to like 2 years later,
Sorry,
you get
what?
so 2 years later, you get like 1,000 for 1 day of the event. Like that's like the scale. But the problem is, as far as I know, the observers, it was way slower. Wasn't it only like a couple of years ago you got to like real proper day rates?
Yeah, it took a while. Maybe it's bad, but like it didn't bother me too much because I always have done this as a side job. I've always had a full-time job. So I didn't push as much as I could. I always, Prius and I always joke because he's like actually a really, really good negotiator. So we always make the fun joke that, you know, the woman and the man are doing the exact same amount of job, but same workload, same job, but he gets higher pay, because he's just he pushes because this is his full-time job. But, yeah, it's really only until the last couple of years that, there's been definitely more budget put into it. It's not that afterthought anymore. We're getting contacted more than 2 to 3 weeks in advance. It's hard to drop everything and travel across the world with 2 to 3 weeks notice. In the Riot Games case, like we're pretty much already booked for all of next year,
that's cool.
Which is really, really nice to hear. Makes planning my life so much better. So, yeah, it's been a big improvement, probably even just like the start of COVID, like even before that was kind of a disaster. But, you know, we took every opportunity we could, because if you say no, you know, they're going to find the next person, and that's who they're going to go to every time. So I'm sure a lot of talent feel the same way, like pass up that one opportunity, might not get the next one.
Also, I can tell you as well, the other area that job was really slow to adapt to the industry is if you were like casters, famously, everyone started the same, right? You had an event and we all just did every game. And then eventually, it was only a couple of years before casters did like one series a day, and then the other caster does the other, and then eventually analysts got the same thing. If people don't know, until like, again, a couple of years ago, if you were the observer, you just work all day long, mate. You're just sat there. Like the joke is, when you hire multiple, they're just shifts. Like that guy goes out like to have some food, you come in. I've seen some of those workloads, even at Flashpoint, like, man, you guys would be sat there for like 9 hours in a row.
Yeah, there's the very famous like Katowice like going till 4 a.m. For BO3 day, which that was rough. Thankfully, that's a thing of the past now.
I like the way in your mind that's like some historic battle that you had in war or something like.
Yeah. Yeah, it did feel like that at time. Yeah, with current events, both like the CSGO Rio Major, all the VCT Masters events, there's always a second POV observer. I'm only doing half the games per day. At most, it's 2 BO3s. And anything after that, it's not even like laziness. It's like staring at dots on a map. Sometimes you have to use 60 hertz monitors too. It's just the way.
Why?
Because it's thinking really hard. Like this is something that I like. It grinds me about, like, I think, you know, what I assume people will think about casters, but the same for observers. It's like, the mental energy is really
sure.
high.
Yeah.
It's very high as well. And that I find that any kind of mental exertion is way more exhausting than physical exertion when it comes to like a workload, right? And so it's like that on top of all of that as well, like having your eyes pierced by your 60 hertz shit.
Yeah, and it's not just it's just not the live maps. It's coming in several hours before, doing play tests, making sure that all works. And we're not. Sometimes it's a long shuttle back because they put us in the nice hotels, but the nice hotels aren't always next to the venue, so they could be up to like 45-minute travel time. So these are 12, 14-hour days. What's also changed is actually we get overtime pay now, which is
that's awesome.
Something that again didn't exist. So we're not too upset when it goes to multiple overtimes.
See, the joke is, they've actually inverted your incentive structure. Like you're actually the only talent now who are loving it when it goes like third map overtime.
Hell yeah, bring it on.
That's good. I hadn't thought of that angle. Fair enough. Okay. By the way, that is actually a point you bring up there, Gio, that I do think is criminally misunderstood by fans. Like, put it this way, this might sound extreme if you're just a fan listening at home. Even just doing a talk show like this is not the same as just doing a call if we had no cameras on, lights off, and we didn't know anyone was there. Like, even just mentally, you have to hold a certain space in your mind, the way you're listening to other people. It is draining, and especially if you're doing a whole day. If you do like 8 hours, that is a lot of work mentally.
One of the things that like I've had to kind of learn and that really frustrates me, like massively frustrates me.
I like the way you're just fully Christmased out, by the way, with that fucking
I went shopping today and like the last few days all I do is I just sit in this onesie.
Love it.
Like, well, I don't want to pay to heat my house, but this is one thing that like I kind of like realized the hard way when I started doing this job, because I've only been doing this professionally since like January 2019. So I'm still very like young in the industry, right? But for me, I found out like the hard way, I find it like exceptionally exhausting to VOD review. Now, obviously all of us have to VOD review. It's part of the job and it's something that I enjoy doing. And I'd imagine everyone finds it really tiring, but like the medication I take for my chronic illness, it makes me really, really tired. So I usually have to sleep like during the day, every day. I fucking hate it. It's like the worst thing ever.
Okay.
And usually I've had to learn as I've been doing this job how to manage this schedule of VOD reviewing and sleeping so that I can actually handle how fucking mentally exhausting it is to get as much done as I need to do. And it feels ridiculous, like to say to people, oh yeah, like I'm tired because I was watching a video game. Like that doesn't make sense, does it? Like to people who don't have to like do that and put in the like that mental work, like that sounds like such a cop-out. And I always feel like so dumb because it's like, oh yeah, my invisible disease and my fake job come together, like really wear me out. And I always just, it's so embarrassing.
Well, I mean, with Valorant though, like watching the VOD, like you don't get all the information immediately. It's like you got to watch it one time to see what happens on the screen, a second time to look at the radar, a third time to try to watch like how people are reacting in the X, right? Because you can't just hop into the VOD and move around. So it's definitely harder to do in Valorant than something like CS.
Mm-hmm. See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.